Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for The Shaping Staff, an episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, produced by Filmation Studios. Now, I've mentioned before on this channel that shortly after the Masters of the Universe series Bible had been written by Michael Halperin in late 1982, a group of Filmation writers were assembled to write a vast batch of possible episode premises, one after the other, just random titles, random synopses, based on the material found in the aforementioned series Bible. The lead writer of the group appears to have been Robbie London, who I will always champion as the guy that shaped the animated world of Eternia, especially with the in-house series Bible he wrote, which took what Michael Halperin had written and shaped it into something a lot more palatable for animation. Going back to the numerous episode ideas, one of those was titled The Shaping Staff. However, it was vastly different from this one. The only plot device that was similar to the final episode produced was that a character disguised as a magician makes King Randall disappear. In the original premise, it was Skeletor, whereas in this episode, as you will see, it is Evil Lynn disguised as Majestra, and yeah, I just spoiled the plot of the episode, sorry about that. Now, this episode's opening scene is what I would describe as a filler scene. It doesn't serve to move the plot forward at all. It's just He-Man fighting random things, although one of the random things is, as you see, a hover robot, or Robot Knight, whichever you prefer, which usually belong to Skeletor. So we can only assume that somehow He-Man and Man-at-Arms acquired one during a battle with Skeletor and turned it into a training robot for the most powerful man in the universe. That said, He-Man does destroy the hover robot by throwing a boulder at it, so that was kind of pointless. The only way this would be considered not a filler scene is if later on in the episode He-Man turned to the camera or said to himself, "Thank goodness Man-at-Arms made me wrestle a giant squid earlier." And you have to ask yourself, what happened to that giant squid? In the original script, Man-at-Arms approaches He-Man and hands him the Sword of Power, and the next shot was to be He-Man holding the Sword of Power up to the sky, about to transform back into Prince Adam, and the scene would end right there, which I think would have made for a very, very nice visual. Now, as I've mentioned on this channel before, when the episodes were broadcast in the UK, certain scenes were removed in order to fill a certain time slot. So in the UK, the edit began here. So from this point on, we don't see any of this scene. I'll tell you when the scene resumes. So here we see Orko in his role as court magician because that is his actual job. If he didn't meet his job requirements, given that this is still an Eternia spawned from Michael Halperin's series Bible, the heroes would have probably thrown Orko in the dungeon. To the dungeon with thee. Actually, that's probably a bit extreme. For the first time, we see Man-at-Arms is somewhat terrified of Orko, almost begging with him not to perform his trick. Now, in the original script, Orko begins to perform his egg trick and it fails because Prince Adam slams the door when he runs into the room. However, what we see next is one of the most bizarre Prince Adam scenes ever. Adam runs into the room and somehow just runs into something. I mean, I don't understand how he doesn't see it. Egg trick fails. Now in the UK, the episode resumed here, so we missed that entire sequence with the egg trick and Adam's short-sightedness. So yeah, in the UK, we saw that initial shot of the royal palace, the royal family around the table, followed by Adam sitting at the table. That was a 51-second edit, I believe. Also, it's weird to see Orko annoyed at Prince Adam for once because it's usually everyone else except Orko. Now, normally, Linda Gary was the voice of Queen Marlena, but here...
I think Adam inherited from me what we Earthlings call a sense of humor.
You'll notice her voice is vastly different. That's because the voice actress of Queen Marlena in this scene is actually Lou Scheimer's wife, Jay Scheimer. Now, Jay Scheimer voiced Queen Marlena randomly throughout the series in episodes such as Creatures from the Tar Swamp and even a Season 2 episode titled Double Trouble. However, she wasn't credited as a voice actor on the series, so for years none of us knew who the other voice of the Queen was. And then randomly, at the San Diego Comic-Con in 2005, fellow fan Lee Clevenger and I were listening to Jay Scheimer shortly after she, Lou and their daughter Erica Scheimer arrived at the BCI booth to promote the DVDs. And suddenly, Lee and I turned to each other and realised, it's the voice of Queen Marlena. It's the other voice of Queen Marlena. So whenever Queen Marlena sounds different, it's Lou's wife Jay. Actually, that makes a married couple playing the voices of a married couple. And here we have Majestra. We see here that Majestra has white hair, which was actually specified in the script by Paul Dini, the writer of this episode, and much later in the series we'd learn that Evil Lynn herself has white hair in another Paul Dini episode. However, her hairstyle as Majestra, this pixie cut of sorts, is so infinitely better than what it would be when she finally reveals her actual hairstyle in the season 1 episode The Witch and the Warrior, in which she sports a rather bizarre buzz cut. Majestra here has already made an impression on her audience, with Orko unimpressed, King Randor entertained, and Prince Adam somewhat in love with the beauty that has appeared before them. Now we see Majestra creating some levitating musical objects. I can never tell if King Randor and Queen Marlena are bopping their heads to the music or if they're just nodding in approval. I always laugh at this upcoming moment because it's the most basic of magic tricks. The magic box disappearing trick is something you see in the real world, but the Eternians here seem absolutely fascinated by it. Surely resident magician Orko has entertained them with disappearing tricks before. Heck, in the season 2 episode Trouble in Trolla, he makes Prince Adam disappear. Actually, thinking about it, in that scene he actually makes everyone disappear. And we see that the Eternians are utterly shocked and horrified when King Randor disappears, and yet a few seconds earlier Orko is trying to summon a demon for goodness sake. Man-at-Arms described this as evil wizardry. What about Orko and his planned demon? And also Teela here is very impressed. And yet Teela has seen the act of teleportation in her world on a pretty frequent basis. A sliding door and a king vanishing doth not magic make on Eternia. I do like this, the idea that Randor starts eating, because watching this episode for the first time, as a viewer, you simply think to yourself, okay, King Randor has worked up an appetite. But Majestra seems awfully frustrated with him on a more intimate level.
You're too kind, sire.
I always find it odd that the pair just leave the room together with no one batting an eyelid. I would like to have seen some reaction shots, maybe one from Queen Marlena side-eyeing King Randor. And Orko now appears to be outside the dining hall, even though he was just in there with the rest of them? Odd. And now here we are in the rarely seen dungeons. They show up again, though differently, in Creatures from the Tar Swamp, Quest for He-Man, and even much later in Season 2 with the episode Mistaken Identity, in which we see some of the rather unique and terrifying inmates. There may be a couple of other episodes, but I think those are the most memorable. We see a great reveal here of Evil Lynn and Beastman. I love Majestra's expression, the smile on her face. She knows right here that they have the upper hand. Going back to the dungeons, the reason we probably never see them pop up much is because in Eternia, their justice system seems to be really quite questionable, because in many of the earlier episodes the villains are actually captured and we are told that they will face the law, and yet in the very next episode they're back out causing trouble, trying to conquer the planet. So you have to think that the villains had an incredible lawyer, probably called Lawyor, and he gets them off all the charges. It's the only thing that really makes sense. An interesting thing about Evil Lynn that isn't always obvious on screen, but is when you see animation cells of her, is that her flesh tone actually has a yellowish hue to it, which acknowledges her action figure, though obviously not as intensely as the yellow of her action figure. Here King Randor asserts that the shaping staff is a myth, a fairy tale. It's funny, in Eternia you have all these magical artifacts and yet so many people don't believe in them. They're either a myth, a fairy tale, or more than often a legend. If you go through the series and highlight the moment someone describes something or someone as a legend, well, it could be a pretty good drinking game. Actually, it's quite funny in this scene. If you listen to the previous dialogue, Evil Lynn is subservient to Skeletor. She has the shaping staff in her possession, and she's ready to give it to the Lord of Destruction. Whereas in many other episodes, once gaining a powerful artifact or the upper hand, Evil Lynn will be more than ready to attack Skeletor and usurp his dominance. This next scene takes place in the conference room, and I know that because in the storyboards it's called the conference room, although it's never referenced as the conference room in any of the episodes that it appears in, and I clearly use the term conference room far too much there. Here we see Skeletor for the first time in the episode. I believe I've mentioned this next bit of trivia before, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. Evil Lynn's original design had a skull motif on her helmet, which was a throwback to her toy design, but Filmation understandably decided it was a detail that the character did not require. It just wasn't necessary. It did look very cool though.
You must make Prince Adam believe that you are his father.
Here's an incredibly infamous scene, not because of the dialogue, but because of one particular visual you can probably make out if you stand on your head right now. Here come Man-at-Arms and Prince Adam, that's not the infamous visual. None of this is questionable, but this is. The artists at Filmation misspelled Grayskull. It should be an A, not an E. even Man-at-Arms and Adam are shocked. So my guess is that the evil cartographer, illustrator, was behind this. I'm going to stop making character puns, I promise. So what I like about this scene is you have to bear in mind this is Beastman in the role of King Randor, and his acting is pretty fantastic. He even references the fact that Randor is often disappointed in his son. King Randor is believable. Beastman is believable as King Randor. And as Act 1 comes to an end, Evil Lyn breaks the fourth wall and lets us know,
after tonight, we won't have to worry about Prince Adam.
And yes, aside from that opening scene, this episode primarily takes place over the course of one night on Eternia. And for the first time in the series, we see that Prince Adam sleeps with his gauntlets, wrist bracelets, still in place. Nice use of shadows here with Cringer in the doorway. Shadows in animation could be achieved one of two ways. Here, Filmation artists have created a layer mask and simply underexposed certain areas of the image, resulting in darker areas across the character. The other way was to create a cell overlay or even paint atop an existing cell with the required shadows using an opaque black paint. This latter technique was less time consuming, but it wasn't as impressive when shot to film. Now, a scene actually shot but left on the cutting room floor had a camera pan outside of Prince Adam's bedroom. Just after Cringer enters the room, the camera was to pan over to Beastman and Evil Lyn, stood around the corner, which explains their sudden appearance shortly after the transformation sequence.
Let's go, Cringer.
I've always loved the staging of this scene, with Cringer's line leading to the crossfade of a now dressed Prince Adam, ready to unsheathe the sword of power.
By the power of Grayskull!
Now, during this transformation sequence, we're going to hear Cringer talk because I want to point out something just as he begins to speak. Ready?
I hate this part.
If you go back and listen very carefully, as Cringer interrupts the transformation sequence, you can actually hear the music edited so that it plays the same brief segment leading into the main fanfare twice. This is done in order to time the full fanfare with the transformation of Cringer and Battlecat. It's very unique, and this is the only time in the series it is ever done. I like the way He-Man has to immediately, understandably, explain his presence in Prince Adam's bedroom to Evil Lyn and Beastman, though I'm surprised they didn't hear the power of Grayskull. It's rather loud. Originally, the confrontation between Beastman and Battlecat here was far longer and had a great shot of the two, with Beastman's foot in the foreground and Battlecat in the distance. The standoff would continue with Battlecat eventually swiping his paw towards Beastman, and Beastman kind of recoiling in fear. That is why you see that quick, awkward, edited shot of Beastman reacting to Battlecat simply roaring, because originally it was after Battlecat had taken a swipe at him. I like that we see He-Man somewhat powerless against Evil Lyn here. His vision has been compromised. And as He-Man's vision slowly returns, we see that Evil Lyn has control of the shaping staff once more. Actually, I haven't thought about this in years, but when I began collecting animation art in 1997, a cell of Evil Lyn picking up the shaping staff was one of the first ones I ever acquired. Feels like a lifetime ago. But here's the odd part. The cell I purchased was from a mirrored shot of the exact same scene. And years later, I would find the corrected sequence in the Filmation warehouse. So my guess is that they animated it, then someone in production realised that Evil Lyn was simply facing the wrong way, and they had to re-Xerox the sequence. Some good reaction shots in this scene, from Man-at-Arm's reaction of Teela being turned into a frog, to He-Man's anger at seeing King Randor the goat and Orko the cricket, who is somehow now in the dungeon. It's a shame that the artists simply blow up a model sheet here and paint it yellow for the pan of He-Man as a golden statue. I would have preferred a more dramatic pose or a more striking angle. Speaking of angles, wonderful angle here of the villains making their getaway. Now, as many of you may have guessed by now, I love what Filmation did with He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. But what we're about to see is one of the most wasted opportunities in the entire series.
I will make another He-Man, an evil one called Faker.
And with that dialogue and gesture, Skeletor not only creates a clone of He-Man, but a clone that is an equal, strength-wise, to the most powerful man in the universe. It just seems like such a throwaway moment. Surely something like the clone of He-Man, a duplicate, a perfect double of He-Man, should be a big moment in which an episode is actually built around, not just like this here pretty minor introduction. Interestingly, in the storyboard, Faker is already at Skeletor's side at Castle Grayskull, implying that he already exists as part of the evil warriors. And Skeletor's dialogue in the storyboard is different in that he says, "I will need Faker, my evil version of He-Man." So there we don't have to worry about the spontaneous creation of Faker. Now, I'm going to go off on a Faker rant now, so strap yourselves in. Faker was one of the most unique action figures of the original Masters of the Universe toy line. It was a figure that Mattel could produce in their sleep. It was a blue version of He-Man wearing an orange coloured version of Skeletor's armour. Or, if like me you prefer the cross-cell artwork, he had magenta armour, which looked far more striking against his blue skin. In short, Faker was a great idea from top to bottom. So much so that they eventually introduced him into the toy line with one of the last waves. Faker was often a hard character for writers to deal with. There seemed to be no specific story. One of the most unique was the Faker that appeared in the UK comics. In those stories, he was independent of Skeletor and was just a random clone who, when not a perfect clone of He-Man, was Faker, a blue-skinned, blonde-haired character wearing Prince Adam's clothing. I mean, how confusing is that? However, given that the animated series showcased many characters perfectly, Faker was completely wasted. For a start, he doesn't sport the action figure's colour scheme, though this can be explained away with the concept, which was used in various canons, that Skeletor had the ability to make Faker look like He-Man for a brief period of time before his true blue visage would eventually show through. Interestingly, in the script that Paul Dini wrote, it says that Faker is supposed to sport the same colours as his action figure, hence Skeletor's line when he says to Faker, "In this dim light she'll think you're He-Man." Also, another disappointing aspect of Faker's appearance is that it's pretty secondary to everything else going on around him. Even the sorceress being turned into a tree is more memorable than his appearance. The thing that annoys me is that Faker, I honestly believe, could have an entire episode revolve around him. The idea of an evil duplicate of He-Man is such a great one. Fun fact, one of the early story premises that I mentioned at the start of this commentary was simply titled Faker with an exclamation mark, and had the villainous clone causing lots of trouble throughout Eternia, leading to people mistrusting He-Man. It would eventually be revealed that Faker was the one behind all the trouble. But yeah, Faker was one of the best and most underutilised aspects of the original Masters of the Universe toy line and cartoon. And now you know what prompted Dushan and I to create The Return of Faker. And if you're listening and have no idea what The Return of Faker is, maybe ask me in the comments section. And yeah, with this short battle and a sidestep by He-Man, Faker falls into the bottomless abyss surrounding Castle Grayskull, never to be seen in the series ever again. Boo.
Wait! Stop!
I should mention when we see the downshots of the abyss surrounding Castle Grayskull, at this point the abyss had not been finalised, and so what we see is a downshot of Snake Mountain's Blood Falls. You can see the background correctly used in the dragon invasion during He-Man and Skeletor's epic battle towards the end of the episode. Eventually the artist would design the abyss for future use, thank goodness. Also, Skeletor describes the abyss as the bottomless gorge, so even the name had yet to be figured out. Go back and look at the size of Teela the frog in that shot. That is one big frog. Now here's something odd. Man-at-Arms just arrived with the palace guard.
Have a nice trip down, Man-at-Arms!
And yet, after he crash lands, where do the rest of them go? They literally just all vanish. Did Skeletor make them all disappear with the power of the staff? I mean, it is possible, but it's not addressed.
You'll pay for that!
Skeletor performs a nice little rotoscoped roll here. Utterly unnecessary, but always fun to see, knowing that actors were rolling around, filmed, and then painstakingly the artists at Filmation created numerous sequences by tracing over their movements. Whew, I really do need to make a video about all the rotoscoping work that took place, don't I? And so the magic of the shaping staff has been broken, and King Randor, Teela, and Orko have been returned to their former glory. Evil Lyn tries once more to work an evil spell, but it backfires. Though, if we know Evil Lyn, and I think we all do, this spell will only be temporary. And Skeletor leaves with yet another wonderful threat.
Once I've restored Evil Lyn and Faker, I'll be back to have vengeance. So swears Skeletor!
And of course, this is the end scene, or end gag as we like to say, because Orko will do something funny, or someone will say something funny. What's interesting about this scene is Teela and Adam have a brief conversation, and Adam implies that he's never met He-Man, which is really quite interesting at this point in the series, because everyone, we just assume, has met He-Man. He's been around so much that he practically lives at the palace. I mean, actually, yeah, he does live at the palace because he's Prince Adam. But it's just really odd to hear Adam say that he hopes he can meet He-Man someday. And now King Randor wants some magic entertainment. As I mentioned before, Orko is the resident court jester. If he doesn't deliver, it's the dungeons for him. But before Orko can begin his magic spell, Cringer announces that his own personal first trick is him disappearing, and leaves. And everyone laughs because it's funny, right? It's funny. Laugh. Laugh, I said. So, the shaping staff. The first act of this episode features some truly wonderful storytelling and direction. The mystery that surrounds Majestra upon her arrival at the royal palace is accompanied by some incredibly haunting music. All of the scenes at the palace are memorable, with each one bringing a new dimension to the story. However, after He-Man is turned into a golden statue, the episode begins to falter slightly. What started out as a great story with the possibility of becoming a classic descends into an almost desperate series of events. Skeletor's creation and usage of Faker is laughable, and even though his battle with He-Man is entertaining, sadly the episode never truly recovers. That said, nostalgia still plays a big part of this episode for me. As a kid, I remember watching this episode and going into school the following day and illustrating Prince Adam unsheathing the Sword of Power. So I'll always have a soft spot for this episode. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.